you are doing a speech at the Oxford Union later this month, and already the motions to deplatform you have started coming in. I understand multiple...
Teddy Hall, most recent. Passed a motion against me last night, I was told.
Right, so they're lining up to protest still, even now in 2023.
Oxford, that's the way it was always going to go. I mean, this isn't a large number of students doing this. It's a small number of students with a strong social media presence who have seized upon this as their hero's journey while they're at Oxford before they go on to management consultancy or law. Totally true. Most of them are, they, thems, which just means they have interesting hair. And they've been desperate for some villain to appear, absolutely desperate for some villain to appear to kind of legitimise all the claims to victimhood that are coming out of them. So
giving them purpose.
Here I am. Here I am. To give my rather moderate, sort of vanilla views, which they can present as hateful and disgusting.
What I think is not said enough and not explored enough is that this gender controversy that people keep writing about and talking about isn't just a niche policy concern that has important implications, although it is that. It's also somehow gets at quite a fundamental way of viewing the world that we seem to be coming to as a society. Is that fair? Do you think that we can use this issue to sort of understand quite important things about the way we are headed?
Well, I think we can understand this, the idea that your identity is more important than anything else about you, as a kind of distortion of a philosophical impulse that humans probably have always had. And certainly since the Enlightenment, the idea of the individual becoming more and more important feeds into this pattern. And there's also, as this is well-worn territory for UnHerd readers, but the idea of freedom being the highest good in the liberal world has produced, sort of through Chinese whispers, almost like a very distorted view that you have to free yourself from everything, or at least you could if you wanted to, and if you want to, then why not? So including your body, including all social norms that you find restrictive, and so on. So I think you can definitely locate gender identity ideology in a trajectory coming from liberal currents that started in the 17th century and probably earlier. But also, on a broader sense, it really is about the relationship between the mind and the world. It's just a really weird way of looking at the relationship between the mind and the world, that the mind has primacy pretty much. It's almost solipsistic, in its, because it's almost like you can, the dominant idea seems to be that you can force other people to see you the way you want them to see you. And you in a way, you're not free because you are dependent on other people, the way they see you, but you are free in that you can morally shame them until they capitulate and say, yes, you are a woman, or now, or whatever. So there is some sort of massive will to power going on here, like to try and control the universe, like control nature, control other people. It's obviously bonkers, but it's not it's not totally anachronistic, I think.
Do you think of, your position and outlook in some ways as a defense of reality in this? I mean, it feels like on the gender issue, certainly, but on some of these other topics you've been talking about, you're sort of insisting that there is
there is some reality.
Some sort of reality out there.
I'm convinced there's some sort of reality. So a lot of the gender madness comes from a bad philosophical position that everything is constructed through language. And it makes no sense internally, and it makes no sense as a satisfying explanation of what is. But it's looked very, very attractive to academics, not philosophers, to be fair to philosophers. Most philosophers would not, that I know, would, if they were to be social constructivists, they would have to be very sophisticated ones that had really tried hard to address all the objections that seem obvious to it. Whereas gender studies social constructivists are just, you know, they're not philosophers, but they've taken this idea that you can construct language through words, and what a surprise, they have all the words, you know, and they sit writing words all day. So it turns out that they are the masters of the universe, you know. So it's not a surprise that they've ended up with a metaphysical position which ends up keeping them in nice jobs, you know, in nice departments.
So which bits of reality should we sort of make a defence for then?
The bits that hit us in the face, you know, the bits that trip us up, the bits that, like, I just think that I'm a kind of empiricist, like, so I think obviously there's an evolutionary story to be told about humans, which are animals. You know, we are animals, and we keep forgetting that we're animals, but we're located in the natural world, and we developed these big brains that were pretty plastic, but they were able to form concepts in response to bits of the world that were already there before we arrived. Now, there's some obvious cultural divergence over those concepts, but there's an awful lot of overlap in those concepts too. And then there are some concepts that are clearly not fit for purpose, and the people that have them tend to die out. And then there's the concepts that people have that, you know, enable them to negotiate the world in a relatively effective way. So those are the ones that are probably more likely to correspond to something that actually is in the world. And that's a kind of realist position, but it's not, you know, it's not a naive realism, I don't think. I mean, I've worked in the university system for a long time, and the university system generally is, you know, full of people who talk a good game about how wonderful they are and absolute shits. I think most people would admit that. And the more they say how wonderful they are, the more likely it is that they are, in fact, personally speaking, and to their students and to their colleagues, you know, deficient in some way. But I didn't... Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it would get that bad, put it that way. You know, I was still a bit surprised.
And is it, do you still, is it the adults, the co-faculty, people at university who you think should have done more to protect you, and then you're more forgiving towards the students who were just sort of young and naive and stupid, or do you actually, did that?
Yeah, I am. I'm forgiving most of the time towards the students. It's always hard to keep that in mind when, you know, this Oxford thing's coming up and I'm not feeling particularly forgiving towards them at the moment, but once it's in my past, I will revert to my magnanimous attitude towards them, because we were all young once and we all thought ridiculous things, and most of them don't know what I think. They really don't know what I think. They haven't read my book. They've just read that I'm an awful person and we don't like awful people, so we're going to go along and tell her that she's awful. But
do you think it's particularly now, though? I mean, I'm just wondering whether we can tie it back to this slightly sort of ungrounded philosophical outlook that people have.
They're unhappy. I think that's the thing. It's hard to stay very cross with them, with some exceptions. But it's hard to stay angry with a bunch of very anxious, neurotic, self-absorbed teenagers and young 20-somethings who, you know, I think are deeply unhappy. Those ones in particular, I mean, they're going to say they're not. You know, this is the sort of thing that really annoys them. They're going to like march around saying, no, we're very joyful. Look at our joy. There's this new thing where they have to exhibit joy at every protest. So they have to dance really angrily, but joyfully, you know. And there's conga lines that are joyful. But it doesn't look very joyful to me. It really doesn't look very joyful to me. And I don't think they are. I think they're really, really anxious. And so I just don't, and that is no doubt a result of the knock-on, the downstream effects of technology and the university system, which is not really fostering, or despite all the talk that goes into it, is not really fostering communities. Like, I was always struck by the fact that a lot of my students didn't really know that many other students. And I'd say, where are your friends? And they're like, oh, I didn't really make any, you know. So they're not having these amazing experiences that an older generation might have had, formative experiences. Not all of them. Some of them are, clearly, but not all of them. So they're lonely and they're looking for friends and they're looking for purpose and meaning. And that's all fine. Yeah, I can forgive them that. It's the lecturers that I really get annoyed with. The best we can do is to stop trying to make grand scale interventions, which we don't know the downstream effects of. We could just take people's phones away as well, in certain contexts. There's little things we could do. You know, universities could push back in little ways. They don't have to do anything big. They could just say no laptops in this classroom. We're going to look each other in the eye. Or they could just stand up for free speech, properly stand up for free speech, and push back against really bullying, tyrannical, narcissistic voices, because there aren't that many of them. And if everybody stood up to them, they'd shut up. That's not a new fact about human nature. So I think I'd be prepared to throw my weight behind small initiatives, but I always get a bit Hamlet-like about big ones, because we just don't know if we'll end up with something worse than when we started.